Hello everyone. So today I wanted to talk about using open source softwares, and I wanted to make this video about using softwares for graphic designing and also for vector graphics. Now, before I talk about those softwares, I just wanted to talk about a little bit of what I used to do when I started my career. Now, I have always used Linux as my main operating system. I think it has been more than 21 years, I guess. I think 22 years roughly. So, I have been using Linux as my main operating system for most of my computer, uh, uh, most of my experience using computers have been mostly on Linux. Of course, I am quite comfortable using Windows and Mac as well. I think so because I have always used Windows whenever I used to work for companies. Mostly, I don't really remember apart from Windows, they gave me a machine with maybe Linux or Mac, apart from, of course, servers. But I have experience on Windows because I used to work for companies where Windows was the main operating system, at least for the desktop or the laptop. A Mac because I developed a couple of apps in the past, and I have been using Mac on and off, but I can use Mac. I think I don't really have any problems using Mac. But in terms of level of comfort, I would say apart from Linux, I can. I'm not really a power user on Windows or Mac, but I'm quite comfortable using those operating systems. So I think I am qualified to talk about this. Now, when I started my career, or I should say, when I graduated from my engineering, when I became an engineer, I always thought of doing something with Linux. It was the time in early 2000s when Linux was, of course, not at all popular. It was there in the industry. People were using it, but it was mostly either geeks or people who are uh, supposed to use Linux. It was around then. It was around that time in early 2000s when Red Hat certifications were getting popular, and I used to actually train people on Linux. I also used to I also used to set up and help other companies with their servers, Linux servers. I remember I did one of a project, very interesting project in one small startup company in Delhi, and that small startup was trying to deploy Linux for each and everything. Basically, all the desktops were on Linux, and they actually took my services to set up those machines. It was really amazing. It was actually before Ubuntu, and it was not at all easy because in Linux uh, you have to basically it was actually the case back then. You have to basically build your build from your source. Like, let us say if you install something, and if you can't really find it in the repository, you have to basically download the source code and make it, and it won't work. Then you have to, of course, download a lot of other dependencies. So around like 2007, I think. Yeah, it was that time when me and my friend thought of starting a website to promote Linux in India, of course. And we booked this domain called Linux India. So this Linux India domain was actually, I think it is one of my first domain that used to run the Drupal websites. I ran most of my Drupal sites, like, with a subdomain of Linux India for testing purpose. And I have been using this domain. I think this is like the very first domain that I started using for developing Drupal websites for other clients. I used to use this domain for my staging instance. Like, let us say if I'm working for a client, I used to give them this URL. Okay, something.linuxindia.com. This is your staging URL. Please go and test. It was a good experience because I if in case you don't know, I used to run a company where I used to develop websites in Drupal. And apart from developing websites in Drupal, we also used to do other things. Let us say graphic designing and vector designing. Vector designing is for vector graphics is for basically logo. So when you make a logo, you can. This is a standard, by the way, especially when you're doing something that needs to be printed. Like maybe you're designing a graph, like maybe a poster or a brochure or a logo. Now, talking about why I launched this website, why I started this website long back. I mean, to be honest, I never really maintained it properly. And right now, this particular site is nothing but simple HTML, which I publish using, which I hope to publish regularly using Emacs and OR mode. Now, on this website, the idea was to share knowledge about different tools that are there in Linux that you can also start using. For example, if you're using Windows and you're trying to adopt, let us say, Linux or any other distribution, any popular distribution of Linux, like maybe Fedora or Ubuntu, the plan was to share the knowledge. Let us say you want to listen to music. So you can definitely listen to music on Linux. If let us say you want to watch movies, these things were not very easy, to be honest, back then. Nowadays, of course, you have plenty of other programs that can do, that can play MP3 or that can actually play videos. But back then, it was actually not possible. I remember it was not natively possible in Linux to even play MP3. You have to install few other things to make it work. And things like video editing, things like image editing, there have been tools for doing those things, but those things were not very popular. And what I started doing is I started, of course, sharing the knowledge on this blog. And nowadays, I think I have resumed that on my channel, on my BlackBerry channel. That is what I have been doing. Now, today I wanted to talk about mainly two things. Talking about graphic designing. So as I mentioned, I used to design graphics, a lot of vector graphics using Corel Draw. So I used to use Corel Draw because Corel Draw is needed, especially when you go to, let us say, a printer, especially in Delhi. They will ask you for a Corel file, like a CDF file. And I like working on Corel Draw. I like doing graphic designing, to be honest. I used to design logos for my client. Like, for example, right now I am showing here the different concepts of a logo for a client of mine who was into perfumes. So there was a client of mine who wanted to launch perfumes. His business was mostly into perfumes and similar things. And this was the logo that I at least the concept that I showed him. And I also used to design brochures. I must admit that I was not really good in graphic designing, but I think I enjoyed it. It was, I think, really a nice experience doing these things. It is, I think, it is something that I might not be natural in it. Like I don't think I am creative, but I enjoyed it. I think when you enjoy something, it is always great. And these things, these graphics, I used to design only in Corel. But of course, for Linux, you don't have Corel. You need to use a software like Inkscape. Now, Inkscape is actually quite good. It is, of course, a software that you can use, of course, in Linux. I believe you can also install it in. It works in, by the way, in Windows as well. But in case you have to design something, maybe you want to design a banner, or maybe you want to design a logo, you can actually do these things. And the reason I started using Inkscape is because I wanted to promote open source software, and when you're promoting open source software, you need to use it as well. Otherwise, what is the point? If you're using Windows, if you're using a Mac, and you're making a video on Linux or all the softwares that you can install in Linux, then I think using Linux and open source software makes sense. So what I have started doing now again is I have started getting rid of my old Corel files. Of course, I don't really design much these days. Whenever I have to design something, I do that in Inkscape now. I try to do it in Inkscape. For example, this particular, if you have been following my videos, I use like a thumbnail, like a stupid thumbnail, but the idea here is to design something I like doing these things. And I last year I also started doing some kind of comics. So basically, just wanted to share something, and the idea was to have fun with my kid. So I started making these comics, and I was making them in Google Slides. Which the good thing is that from Google Slides you can actually export them in SVG, and Inkspace can accept SVG, so you can actually import SVG files to your Inkspace, which I have started doing recently, and I have now decided to get rid of, or at least use Google Drive, Google Sheets, Google Slides minimum. I mean, I have to use it because, let us say, if someone is sharing me a link or sharing a document with me, I have to use it. Similarly for let us say MS Word, I, I and of course Excel, I cannot stop using them completely. I mean, I want to use open source. I do use open source softwares for my own personal needs, but sometimes I have to, of course, use those other proprietary softwares. But for graphic designing, as I mentioned, I am not really doing any graphic designing right now, at least for other clients. I'm mostly focused on Jira and Atlassian tools. But for my own personal needs, I think I will now focus and just use Inkspace. And I'm not really very good in Inkspace, to be honest. I think I'm more comfortable using Corel, but the concept is same. And what I will do now is on my channel, I will of course share things that you can do with Inkspace as well. So uh, expect videos on Inkspace, expect videos, tutorials on Inkspace. Of course, there are plenty of other videos online, but if I'm, let us say, doing something new, or if I'm next time I'm working on Inkspace, I'm making maybe a small comics for myself, I will definitely share. So apart from Inkspace, there's also one more tool that I think I should mention, that is Inkspace. Now, I have been making websites for a long time, and if you're making a website, if you're, let us say, working on anything where you are supposed to uh, you're supposed to manipulate the graphics, then Inkspace is definitely the recommended, or I should say the tool of choice. You can use Inkspace to, of course, make wonderful images. Maybe you have, let us say, an image that you want to modify. You can do that. You can actually not only manipulate images, you can also make banners for your website. You can add text on top of it, and you can do a lot of wonderful things. So this is something that I am now thinking of doing. I will now also continue. I think I did make a couple of videos on Inkspace, but I will also make more videos where I will try to show maybe a few things about GIMP space. Again, I'm not an expert on GIMP space, but I think I know GIMP space enough to do something useful for me, for myself. If I have to, let us say, add a text on the image, if I have to, let us say, crop it, if I have to, let us say, maybe you're working on a design where you have to crop out an image, and maybe you have to maybe remove some kind of text from the image. You can do a lot of wonderful things by the way. I mean, it is not, I'm sure it is not as powerful as Photoshop, but I think for personal needs, or maybe if you're running a small company where graphic designing is not really the main aspect, you can actually do a lot of wonderful things. And there are few things that I use Inkspace for. Like, for example, if I'm working on an image and I have to manipulate it, I have to let us say enhance it slightly. You can do that. You can actually do a lot of wonderful things with Inkspace quite easily. I think I'm quite comfortable using Inkspace, and I also enjoy working on it. I think enjoyment part is really important. So if you have to let us say make simple thumbnails for your YouTube videos, you can use Inkspace for that, and it is actually not very difficult to use if you start using it. I think in just a few minutes maybe you can actually get a very good idea about what Inkspace can do, the potential of Inkspace. For example, if you have to add a text on top of an image, and you also want to add a shadow, there are so many things that you can do quite easily with with Inkspace that I am now hoping to share with all of you. I think I did make few videos, but I will make more. And the reason I'm talking about these tools is because I want to uh, I want to basically share this, that if you are wondering whether Linux can replace uh, your 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 Windows or Mac, I think it can. The good thing about Linux is that, I think as I have been talking about, I'm sure you know about it already, but it works really well on old laptops. If you're a student, or maybe if you're into some kind of minimalism, or maybe you want to save money, or maybe you want to know how computers work, install Linux on your laptop. You will learn a lot about different things that you can do with Linux. You will learn about computer science in general, I believe, because there are so many things that that can be modified in Linux, and you have to basically modify it. I mean, you don't have to. For example, right now I'm using Arch Linux, which I started using last year in November, but I was using Fedora. Fedora is actually not at all difficult. Uh, if you're a new Linux user, you can, of course, and don't really want to take risk, and you want to maybe play safe, try Ubuntu or maybe Fedora. Then, if you're using Fedora, I think use KDE Desktop Manager, which will make your life a lot easier. It is simple to use, but if you're using something like Arch Linux, I think you can expect a bit of adventure in the beginning. I think few months will go by when you are trying to make it work for you, for your workflow. But I don't really think Arch Linux is for advanced Linux users or not advanced Linux users. I don't really believe in these things. I think we all are different. It is all about how much you're willing to spend time with of course, Linux. If you don't have a lot of time and you want to get things done, then of course install Ubuntu or Fedora. If you have time, maybe you have one extra laptop and you want to learn and you want to also experiment a bit with different things, and you want things to work exactly the way you need in your operating system, then of course Arch Linux will give you a lot of flexibility. But don't really think too much about the distribution in the beginning. Install whatever you can get hold of. Maybe you have, let us say, a CD of Ubuntu somewhere. I'm not really sure if they send CDs anymore, but I had a lot of CDs. I installed Ubuntu, and to be honest, I never really liked it, because and the reason I never really liked it was not because it was not good, but because I was too much invested, and I was too much used to Fedora. So in your case, you don't have to. These days, actually, it is very simple. Download the ISO and install whatever you can. I will be inclined to say install Fedora first, because that is what I used to use. But again, that is my opinion. If you're like me, who's comfortable doing things on computer, then then I think you can also be fine with Arch Linux. If you have any experience using Linux in the past, go for Arch Linux. Because I think when you install Arch Linux, you will just get a terminal, and then of course you have to build the whole system yourself. And in the process, you will learn quite a lot. And I have been, as I mentioned, I think in one of my videos before, I think I have been quite good in maintaining my like documenting my journey of using Arch Linux. So I think it was on the other side. Let me go to the blog section. So I have a couple of sites. So I think I'm maintaining this Arch Linux blog, installing Arch Linux on ThinkPad X20. The idea here is to share my journey, and of course the main reason I'm maintaining this blog is because I want to, let us say I forgot the command, like how to do this in how to do a specific thing, which I did. I remember, because when you're learning something, you search online and you do it, and it works. But after a while, you don't remember anymore how to do it. So I think it is always a good idea to maintain your own notes. So basically, this is like my own. This page is nothing but a simple list of different things that I have been doing with Arch Linux, and all the tools that I have been using that I modified. And the good thing is that I can refer back to it if I need to. People have also made shell scripts to basically configure each and everything in one go. But the idea here, because I'm using Emacs and org mode, the idea here is to basically make a document using literate programming concepts. For example, if I'm referring a file, let us say xinitrc file, So this particular file is actually, of course, it has the content of the file, but using literate programming, you can actually pull the content dynamically. So if I'm looking at the document and I want to update the content of this particular file, I don't have to do a copy paste. I can press Control C, and it will bring up, like, pull in the latest file content and update my page automatically. So the idea here is to basically maintain your own repository. And in this video, I wanted to mainly talk about Inkscape and GIMP for graphic designing. And I also started using Kdenlive recently. But in case in case you're new to my channel, I don't really massively do a lot of video editing. For example, the video that I'm recording right now, I'm using nothing but a shell script using FFmpeg to record it. I don't use OBS anymore, although OBS is also open source, but I don't use it because I prefer doing things myself, and I'm quite comfortable with the setup of my shell script. I think this particular webcam window is coming from my webcam, of course, but it is also using a shell script. Now, I quite enjoy doing these things because you learn so many things when you are like manipulating things on your desktop or maybe your operating system, and you can do these things on Linux. For example, on Linux, I have different like keyboard bindings. Let us say if I have to search for a YouTube video, I can do that using I press a key on and it will search, and it will also play the video on the terminal. And I can also search. I can have this menu on top where I can maybe, I think I talked about this, like I make thumbnails, and when I make a thumbnails, I basically use another shell script to generate a thumbnail. And in my thumbnail, I use different colors, but I don't remember all the hexadecimal values. So I have created this D menu to give me all the list of hexadecimal values that I can use. And actually, I use this thing in my when I'm making a small, let us say, graphics using GIMP or Inkscape, because all my favorite colors, the hexadecimal values are there for me to. I can use them. I can refer to them whenever I want. So when I do Super C, if I let us say have to make or do something with Emacs and OR mode, I have a color for it. So I can select it, and the color has been copied, and I can now maybe paste it somewhere if I want to. I can maybe not this one. I think I need to just try. Let me try one more time. What happened? I think it didn't work. Okay, let us do that again. And it didn't copy. That is strange. Okay, I think something is not working. Let me try one more time. No, not really. Let me try. Let me just copy one more time. I think I need to fix my script, which is a good thing actually. Okay, it worked. All right. So I think I need to modify my shell script slightly to make it work properly. But there is a lot of learning, and today I thought I'll also share about what I used to do in the past when I used to design graphics. And yes, I was using Corel because I had to, but I believe if you're using Inkscape, you can also export to SVG, and maybe you can convince your printer to accept SVG file, or maybe PDF. You can also use PDF file, by the way. PDF file also works fine. But the main reason why I use Corel Draw for vector designing was because, let us say you're sitting with the printer and you're trying to print a logo, and you have to make a small last minute change. So you can actually give him the file and you can actually make changes on the fly, because CDF file works, and all the printers, at least in Delhi, they have Corel Draw. So you can expect those small modifications easily if you have to do those things on the fly when you're trying to maybe generate the final output. But I did try with PDF, by the way. I did try with SVG. It was not a great experience because when those printers print out something, they also sometimes manipulate the colors based on, because they have those big printers where they know the colors, they know how to. I'm not really an expert on printing. I have absolutely no idea about colors, but when you give them those CDF files, they used to also manipulate or make changes in the colors slightly. For example, if I give them, let us say, a red color, they know that this red color will not work properly on the final output. and they have to of course make small changes. So that is the only reason that is the only reason why I use Corel. But I am now thinking of course, as I mentioned, because I'm not really doing any vector graphic designing for my clients. I am doing it only for myself, and I want to actually share how wonderful Inkspace is, and also GIMP. And the main reason I'm doing it is, of course, I enjoy doing these things. I quite like designing graphics. It feels good when you make a logo based on nothing but a concept. It feels good when you start with an image and you do something wonderful with it. I quite like it. I think I can spend hours if I have like a lot of time. Although I have been saying that like I don't really do editing because uh, I kind of hate editing, like video editing, because it consumes a lot of my time. Because it consumes a lot of my time because I am a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to designing graphics. As I mentioned before, I'm not really good, but I'm willing to spend hours. And when I look at the clock, okay, it has been like 4 hours, and I'm still making this logo, which is not going to cover for for my effort, for my 5 hour effort that I spent today. But I do it for my own personal satisfaction, and I'm also thinking now to touch upon these graphic designing aspects, because I know a lot of people, especially if you are maybe a startup, or maybe you are a freelancer, or maybe you want to become a freelancer and you want to get started with graphic designing. You can actually earn money making logos, and maybe by making those banners. I mean, you can do a lot of wonderful things. Or maybe if you're doing something with web designing, let us say you're a web developer and you don't really want to pay anyone to design a logo for you, you can do it yourself. I mean, it is now. I mean, to be honest, the main reason why I started doing it for my clients, because I didn't want to pay anyone else, because I thought I can do it. I mean, logo is nothing but an object that basically tells you about what the company is doing. And usually when you make a logo, you will get some brief from the client. Okay, I want to make a logo with lotus or a flower, some kind of flower in golden colors with different petals, and can you give this an emboss effect, or maybe do whatever you want. But for example, when I was making this logo, I started with something like this. Then my client didn't like it. My client liked the font and the word Gandhari aromas, but he wanted the logo or the petal to be in golden color. So I started, of course, revising it, and these were the final two images that I ended up generating for him. And let us not talk about graphic designing as an industry, because it is a bit of a pain to work because people don't really pay a lot if you don't if your approach is a bit I mean, you have to basically, I mean, it is probably true for every industry. If you're doing graphic designing, I think you have to be very clear in the beginning, like you're going to make 2 or 3 different concepts and maybe 4 different revisions. So this is what I used to do. Like, for example, if a client is agreeing, or if a client is willing to pay me for designing a logo, I used to tell that client, okay, I'll make 2 or 3 concepts, and then based on the concept that you will select, I will do 4 further revisions, something like that, because I wanted to save myself from multiple revisions. Because if you are doing graphic designing, clients will ask you to revise things over and over again, and it is a bit of a pain. So I think it is very, very, very important in the beginning to clarify your approach, and I think clients will also appreciate this, like especially in graphic designing. Same for, of course, video editing. I never really did video editing. I think I did like few of them, but not really a lot. And I used because I had Mac, so I was using Final Cut Pro. No, I think I used Premiere Pro for a while. But again, it was not really something that I wanted to do as my main career, because I was always into development. I was always into programming and doing things, developing things like websites or apps. Or later on, of course, I moved on to Jira, was something that I enjoyed more than graphic designing, and that is why I thought I'll probably leave this graphic designing for my own personal satisfaction. I'll not do it as my main career. But uh, but who knows? I mean, I think it is always good to know these things. If you are trying to adopt open source software, it is maybe I think it is definitely a good idea to use and at least give these softwares a try, because you might not be able to replace these softwares or your main softwares with these softwares from day one, but at least you will get an idea. For example, when I started using GIMP for the very first time, I realized that I don't really need any other tool. It is quite good for my needs. It can do everything that I need to do. Like, you can have various effects, there are different filters, and it is wonderful, to be honest. And GIMP has worked for me quite well all these years. Similarly for Inkspace, the only problem I had with Inkspace was the format. I can design something in Inkspace, but I cannot really give it to the printer always. So that was the main reason why I why I continued with Corel Draw for a long time. But of course, not anymore. So hopefully I will make more videos on GIMP, and I will definitely start making videos on Inkspace. So that is all I wanted to talk about today. I think I'm just talking about random things today, but I hope I gave you some ideas about adopting, using Linux or open source software in general for solving your problems. Try to use Linux, try to use it as your main operating system, and you'll be fine. And of course, there are plenty of videos online, like my videos, that will help you to learn it and get the most out of it. Alright, I hope you enjoyed watching this video and you learned something new today. Thank you very much.